Oh. Okay. All right, we ready for music? Okay. All right, let's all stand. Welcome to our service. We're going to sing The Old Account Was Settled. There was a time on earth when in the book of heaven an old account was standing for sins yet unforgiven. My name was at the top and many things below. I went into the keeper and settled it long ago, long ago, long ago. Yes, the old account was settled long ago. And the record's clear today, for he washed my sins away. When the old account was settled long ago. The old account was large and growing every day, for I was always sinning and never tried to pay. But when I looked ahead and saw such pain and woe, I said that I would settle. I settled long ago, long ago, long ago. Yes, the old account was settled long ago. And the record's clear today, for he washed my sins away. And the old account was settled long ago. When at the judgment bar I stand before my King, and he the book will open, he cannot find a thing. Then my heart will be glad, while tears of joy will flow, because I had it settled, and settled long ago, long ago, long ago. Yes, the old account was settled long ago. And the record's clear today, for he washed my sins away. When the old account was settled long ago. Good singing. You may be seated. So that song goes right along with our lesson tonight on New Testament says we're debtors, we're slaves to sin, but Jesus frees us from that. His blood pays the price to set us free. So we're going to look here at slavery in the Bible. This is pretty lengthy topic, so we're going to break it up at least into 3 weeks, maybe more, to cover it all. But this is something that is just hammered over and over and over again by people who want to pick apart the Bible and tear apart people's faith. Of the way it works is that a very common argument is to say, we know the Bible was dead wrong on slavery, so therefore the Bible is dead wrong on homosexuality. Therefore the Bible's dead wrong on hell. And they'll cherry pick little phrases of verses or little snippet of a verse here completely out of context and be like, see, the Bible says slavery is okay, so we know the Bible's wrong there, so therefore it's wrong on Jesus. It's wrong on the resurrection. It's wrong on this and that. And unfortunately, many churches, the American church, that like to talk about icky things and controversial things, and so we just leave that to let one side completely win the argument. We have no answer. So many Christians, the churches are not equipping people to know, okay, what does the Bible say? What do these verses actually mean? And so this can throw people for a loop there, unfortunately. So we will look at this and see what the Bible actually does say. But to begin with, we need to see first that, yes, the Bible does talk about slavery, though it is different than what we normally think of. And just because that addresses that does not mean that it is God's perfect will for that to exist. So number one in this study here, point number one, Bible laws are to limit the worst abuses in a sinful society. So the Bible will address things and it will put limits on things, especially in the Old Testament law. And those are as protections, but those are maybe not the ideals. So an example that here is for divorce. So Matthew chapter 19, verse 7, we see this with Jesus in the New Testament. The Pharisees and Sadducees are trying to trick up Jesus with, well, what about divorce? What about this? A guy was, this one woman, she was married to 7 different husbands, and then they all died, and then she died. Whose wife is she in heaven? All this absurd stuff. And so Jesus here in Matthew chapter 19, verse 7, then they said to him, why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away? Verse 8, he, Jesus, said to them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. So here Jesus is saying that God's perfect standard is that people would always remain pure, would always love their spouse, so there would be no infidelity, there would be no disagreements, and they would stay married their entire lives. Yes, that was God's perfect will. However, God knows that we are imperfect people. We are in a sinful world, a fallen, cursed world. We all inherit a sin nature from Adam and Eve. And so therefore, God could say in the Old Testament, he could say, no divorce allowed whatsoever. And that's going to go over like a lead balloon. People are not going to follow that. It's just not going to happen. So therefore, God allows it only in certain particular circumstances, though that's not God's perfect will. And so, and when you actually read in the Old Testament, okay, what are the, yes, Moses does allow divorce, but what does the text actually say? It says that, yes, a man can divorce a woman, not for any reason, has to be just particular reasons. In America, we have no-fault divorce here, but it had to be for a specific reason, and that if she married a second husband and then was divorced from the second husband, the first husband could not take her back. So basically, this is protection. This is saying these women can't just be traded around like property. This is protecting the women. There is why that's even addressed. And so, in the Old Testament, you have, there's God's moral law, the 10 Commandments. So, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, not commit adultery. Those are God's moral commands. His holy perfection is revealed in that. And so those never change. Over in New Testament, Old Testament, the moral laws stand. There is the ceremonial laws. Okay, wash your hands when you do this. That's the ceremonial part of it. And then there's the civil laws of just how Israel was to function as a country. God gave them these instructions as they wandered in the wilderness. Hey, when you move into the promised land and you set up your administration and your organization, here's how you do it. Here's your local government. Here's your laws here. So you got civil laws like, if you're going down the road and you see your neighbor's cow has gotten out from the field, you take it, you don't just ignore it, you take your neighbor's cow back to him, okay? How many of us does that apply to us in our daily lives? How many of us do we see our neighbor's cow get out from the barn? That has happened a time or two when I lived in Oklahoma, actually, but in general here in Arizona, not really a common thing. However, so that's a civil law, but we know the principle behind it, okay? So in our day and age, if your neighbor's broken down changing a tire on the side of the road, you don't just buzz past him, but you stop and help and try to give him a hand. And so we see this. So there's a lot of things when the Bible will address something, especially in the first 5 books of Moses there. Just because it addresses something does not mean that God completely rubber stamps it as this is my perfect will. So, marriage, divorce is one of those. The Bible has, in the Old Testament law, has rules about warfare. Now, we know God is love, God is holy, we're all related as family. So, yeah, in an ideal, perfect world, there would be no warfare. There would be no nations fighting against each other and killing each other. But in a sin-cursed world, that's not going to happen. And so there's always going to be Hitlers and dictators and armies that are out there. And so even just to defend ourselves and keep from invasion, we have to have our own army. And those that have served in our military to protect us, that's necessary to keep the bad guys at bay. And so, yeah, God could say in the Old Testament, he could say, no warfare, not allowed whatsoever. But that's not going to happen. It's going to be so unrealistic, it's not going to be followed at all. And so it's the same thing with, yes, the Bible does have limits and rules about what we call slavery, even though that's not quite the right term for it. But just because God puts that on there, yeah, God's perfect will would never exist. But he knows our fallen heart, he knows our condition, so he puts those limits on there. You can have it where when governments pass laws that are too far, and they might be good laws, and it might be what is best for society, but when the people's hearts, when their desires are too sinful, you can have problems where those laws are disregarded so much that they're completely ineffective. So, for example, in the United States, back in the 1920s and the 1930s, we had prohibition. Alcohol was not allowed, the sale, the bars, and none of that was allowed, okay? Now, that's something, we as Free Will Baptists, we would agree with that, and I'm personally for that, but as Americans as a whole, our nation was not okay with that. And so you had the deal where when things are so far, you get black markets and you get underground markets for that, to where you got the rise of organized crime, you got Al Capone, you got the mafia and all these bootlegging operations bringing alcohol in, and there's no way to enforce such a law like that, so it essentially became ineffective. So it was repealed. And then we see it right now in our time with our nation, and the same thing with drugs, that we have for many years, we have said no drugs whatsoever. Marijuana is a federal crime, having cocaine, heroin, having all those is a federal crime, meth, all that. And yeah, I agree with that. The Bible agrees with that. We don't need to abuse our bodies with substances. However, our society has not agreed with that. And so because that law is so stringent, we've had a black market to where the price of cocaine, heroin, all that has been so high, it has led to huge criminal activity. We got so much violence along the southern border. We've got these drug cartels and the war essentially going on down there, what they're willing to go through to get drugs into our country because the price is worth it, because they're willing to sell it for that. And you have abuse, especially very sad among like African American communities, of a whole generation of young men who have been locked up and incarcerated for a big chunk of their lives for just having a little bit of marijuana on them, because they have no jobs, they have nothing they can do in the neighborhoods they live in. And you get with the young people, you get a glorification of gang culture because they kind of fight the police who are viewed as the oppressors. So I'm not for people doing meth or marijuana or any of those things, but we've seen that our society is not willing to accept the way the laws as they are. And so God in his wisdom, when he gives the Old Testament, he doesn't give laws that are too far that they'll be completely ignored. So he doesn't say no divorce, no warfare, no slavery. They wouldn't abide by that. So therefore, to limit and to protect the vulnerable, he does give some laws there to keep the worst abuses from taking place. So we'll look at that. Number two, with this, that race-based perpetual slavery did exist. It did exist. And this is what, when we think of, in America, when we think of slavery in our nation's history with the South, with the Confederacy, the Civil War, with the slave trade from Africa and the cotton plantations and everything involved in that, this is what we think of. We think of people that were made into slaves because of their race, because of who they were, their skin color, and a perpetual slavery, that there was no end for it, there was no way to buy themselves out, their children born into it were condemned to slavery. We see that. We see that in Scripture with Israel in Egypt, that a new king comes up. So after Joseph, during those 400 years in Egypt, Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So secular history tells us this is the Hyksos invasion. They were the chariot people. They come in, they take over Egypt. So they're outsiders. They don't even know who Joseph is. Therefore, verse 9, and he, Pharaoh, said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and go up out of the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. So here, the people, the children of Israel, are enslaved, and this is a racial-based slavery. If you're an Egyptian, you're a free person. If you're a Hebrew, you're made into a slave just because you're a Hebrew, not for any other reason, just for being a Hebrew. And this is perpetual slavery. Your children are born into slavery. There is no end to this slavery. So, yeah, that happened. It wasn't just the Egyptians who did this. Pretty much everybody who had a growing empire, the Babylonians, as they take over cities, they do this. The Assyrians do this. So that's just kind of how the ancient world worked. And this is how it was in America. And so that's why there's a lot of parallels that African Americans back when they were slaves and back in the times of the Civil War, they looked as Abraham Lincoln as a Moses-type figure because there was a lot of parallels with that. As just as Moses, God used him to free Israel, that Abraham Lincoln and the terrible cost, America's costliest war, 600,000 American dead in the Civil War for the price of slavery and other causes that it went on with that. Just tragic there, but it is the price of sin. However, when we look at the Bible in the Old Testament, when it does have a law about slavery there, usually it is not referring to that, the perpetual slavery, or the race-based slavery. Sometimes that's also called, in like history books, that's called chattel slavery, chattel slavery. It means property, so that people are just property. They're traded like property. They are owned as property. However, the Bible, when it has these verses about slavery, and this is what atheists will like to copy and paste in internet chats and stuff, these verses are not about that. These verses are about essentially what we would call labor contracts and an indentured servants type relationship, and this is based on debt. So a person could go into debt. So if a person became so impoverished that they lost their land, the only thing they have left of any kind of value, they don't have anything at the moment, but they have their future labor. That's the only thing they could sell, their future years of labor. And so the Bible says they could enter into a contract with someone, kind of an employee-employer type relationship. You could sell your future labor, and you would have this agreement, and the Bible puts some limits on that. So this is you don't want perpetual debt. You don't want to be in debt for your entire life. So it says 7 years was the maximum that you could have with this. So you can't sign a thing for 30 years of labor or 50 years or something, but 7 years was the max there, again, as a protection. So this is what, and the King James and the New King James are accurate to use this, but a lot of other translations do not. This is what the term bond servant is what this is. So a bond is a debt. You can buy a debt. Our government sells 10-year treasury bonds, 30-year treasury bonds. You only got 27 trillion in treasury bonds out there already, but let's sell some more. So you buy debt, you buy treasury bonds. So a bond servant is someone who serves in exchange for debt. They have gone into debt for 7 years worth of room and board, and that's the idea with this. We see, so Exodus chapter 21, Verse 1, now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. So this can be between, there's nothing racial about this whatsoever. This can be between Israelite people and other Israelite people. This is, the whole Roman economy was built on slavery. Just if you were poor, you became a slave in the Roman world. And so whether, it doesn't matter your skin color or any of that. And so the contract, and then it gives some more details, verse 3. So if he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. So if you got a single guy that he signs this 7-year employer-employee relationship, a voluntary relationship, okay, no one's pointing a gun to his head saying you have to do this. Okay, this is voluntary agreement that they do here. God is protecting it, saying 7 years is the max. So if you do this, if he's single when he comes in, then when his 7 years are up, he leaves single. If he and his wife do it together, they both sign up for 7 years together, then their contract would expire at the same time. However, maybe if he's single initially, but then he gets married along the way, then his employer has been footing the bill for his wife and for his children, so therefore the wife and children are going to be at a different term. So maybe the guy, he may have like 3 years left, and then he gets married, and so then his wife is going to have 7 years in total. So you'll have 7 years, and if they have children born along with that, because the employer, the master, has been footing the bill for them, so they'll be staggered. They'll be at different times. So it gives details on that. Verse 4, if his master has given him a wife, she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her masters, and he shall go out by himself. So his contract would be done before theirs. He can go out on his own if he wants to. And there's some things that aren't said in this but are possibilities. So one thing, he can go out by himself. He can leave his wife and kids for a little while. He can go get another job, and save up a little bit of money, and he can buy their contract out early. That's a possibility. So this is it's a monetary-based thing, so 7 years. So if he can save up a little bit, he can buy theirs. Maybe he can shave off a year or two of theirs. So he might only have to be apart from them maybe a year or a year and a half or something. Just depends on what the numbers are. So that's an option. If while they're working for the master, if he comes into some money, maybe an inheritance, his older family dies, he inherits some money, he can buy himself freedom early. He can buy all of his family freedom early. That's a possibility there. However, if he wants to stay, and so we would say this is re-upping. This is very similar to in our culture today, the military. Okay, so if you want to go to the military, go in the Army, Navy, usually it's kind of like a 4-year thing. You sign up for, I'm going to be in the Army for 4 years initially, and so they take care of your room, your board, your clothing. They give you everything you need, but they have the right to tell you what to do. Okay, we're going to put you on the other side of the world. We're going to put you here. They are in charge, but they provide everything. So it's a voluntary thing in our culture. We don't have the draft anymore, so that's the arrangement. And so this is what the correct term is indentured servitude with this. This is what happened a lot in America in the founding. When people over in Europe, they didn't have any kind of money to cross the Atlantic, and so they would sell their future years of labor, say, okay, I'm going to hire myself out to be a blacksmith's apprentice for several years, so he's going to foot the bill for me to get on a boat and cross the Atlantic, and then I get over here and I'm going to have to work for 5 years, 7 years, whatever the contract agreement was there, and then when that time was done, they were free. Revisionist history books today try to lump all this together. They try to say indentured servitude is the exact same thing as slavery, which is the exact same thing as chattel slavery, and it's all the same thing, okay? It's not. There's very strict differences between that, and so indentured servitude, if done fairly, can be a positive thing for everybody. Yes, it can be abused. People can break their contract. The person can cross the Atlantic and then run away and not fulfill their time. The employer can abuse his power. Yeah, there's room for abuse there, but if it's done fair, it's a fine deal. It works out for everybody. So, verse 5, though, in the context of this in the ancient world, so if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free. So he wants to re-up. If you're in the military, this is what they call it, re-up. Your 4 years are up, and they kind of, hey, we'll give you sort of a bonus if you stay on for a couple more years. They try to keep you in with that. Some guys like to do that. Some guys try to get their early 20 retirement there in the military. So if he wants to re-up, then it says, verse 6, then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. So it seems a little weird to us, but what this is saying is that if you're going to re-up with the same person, then this is just going to be a permanent contract that is there. Whereas if he wants to only do 7 years, he's got to do that with somebody else. If he wants to do a 7-year thing. Or he can just get another job. Maybe he's learned some skills so he can just be a free man, be a free trader after that and work to buy off the options with his wife. But again, this is all voluntary. People have the choice. Okay, if I want to stay, I can do this. If I want to go, if I want to save up money, okay, the choice is here. This is completely different from slavery, America, like we think of slavery there. And so also with this number 4, we'll look at a little bit of this and look at it more next week as well. So as the vulnerable, Bible laws protected slaves. So when the Word of God gives laws there in the Old Testament, it is to protect the weak and vulnerable. So if you actually read the text there, it's not protecting the masters. It's not protecting the wealthy people who've got money and who've got political connections. They're already protected. They're already going to be taken care of because of their influence. So therefore, God puts the emphasis on protecting the vulnerable, those that can't afford the lawyers and can't afford the court fees. That's kind of the exact opposite of what we do in our country today. If you actually read what the IRS and the tax code says, if you read what the legal things say, it's all about protecting the corporations and the big shots. You can't sue us. You can't do anything to us. We can take everything you own. It's kind of, and it's such a joke now to where Now with our government, hey, we want to make a new finance reform bill, is what the president or Congress will announce. And so what happens? Well, the banks, Chase, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, they'll get together and they will write the bill themselves and then hand it to Congress. Here's a new finance reform bill. Why don't you rubber stamp that for us? And sails through Congress there. Where we want to have a new internet privacy bill. So Google and Facebook and Apple all get together and they write an internet privacy bill that's going to give them all the advantages. And then they send it to Congress, and Congress rubber stamps that, and that's the new law that we have. That's how our country works there. And so it's all about protecting the corporations. Whereas in the Bible, God wasn't looking out for the corporations or wasn't looking out for the super wealthy. He was looking out for the vulnerable, for the weak. Over and over and over, you read the Old Testament. What does it say? Don't you mess with those widows. Don't you dare abuse those widows. God knows those widows. If you abuse them, they're going to cry out to me, and I'm going to teach you a lesson. You're going to get it. Don't you mess with the fatherless. Don't you mess with the blind. Don't you lead them out of the way. God is about protecting the vulnerable, about protecting human rights, something our government could do a lesson to learn from there. And so we see with this, basic human rights are something that is valued in the Old Testament and the laws that are given there. And so with when the laws that are, slaves or bond servants is the correct term. So laws about these bond servants are different in the Old Testament, in the Bible, from laws about property, about animals. So for instance, today, in various parts of the Middle East, in Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, various things, if you go out into an open marketplace and you steal a piece of fruit off one of those stalls, what's going to be the punishment? They're going to chop your hand off. You're going to lose your hand. That's what's going to happen there. Now, that's the Middle Eastern laws of those countries. Now, in the Bible, the laws for stealing products, there was no permanent physical damage that goes on with this. So in the Bible, if you stole a sheep, you were supposed to repay. You get caught, you're supposed to repay 4 sheep, including the original one as well. So you repay, but you don't, losing a hand is kind of harsh there. Whereas biblically, yes, you repay, but you repay with extra, quite a bit of interest there. If you steal a cow, you're supposed to repay back, I think, 5 cows. Whereas, however, in the Bible, if you steal a person, as we'll look at here, if you kidnap somebody, that is different. Now, that's not, other cultures of the ancient world, it done that way. Slaves were just property, just like stealing a cow, just like stealing a chariot. Whereas in the Bible, if you steal a person, you need to be killed for that. That is a capital offense. So we'll look at this here. So one of the protections for the vulnerable is there is no kidnapping for enslavement. So this is completely often ignored. So when people try to equate bond service and slavery mentioned in the Bible to American slavery, these two verses completely blow that out of the water, because with these verses, what they actually say, the whole American system of capturing people over in Africa, selling them at slaves auctions, putting them on ships, forcing them to come over the Atlantic to the U.S. and being sold again at slave auctions in South Carolina and in Georgia and Alabama and those places to work on plantations and cotton fields, that all is disallowed in the Bible. That is all marked as sin and marked as evil, and it was evil. Exodus chapter 21, verse 16. So it says, "He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he's found in his hand, shall surely be put to death." So that's not a lot of wiggle room in that. That's pretty clear. If you capture people and you sell them into slavery against their will, you are a slave trader. You need to die, is what God says. Repeats that again in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 7. "If a man is found kidnapping any of his brethren of the children of Israel and mistreats him or sells him, then that kidnapper shall die, and you shall put away the evil from among you." And the great irony with this is that Moses is writing this, but if we rewind the clock 400 years, that's exactly what Joseph's brothers, the founders of the nation of Israel, did to him. They did that to their own brother. They wanted to kill him, but it's like, you can kill him and he can be there dead, or we can sell him and we can make a little bit of money. So they sell him there, but yeah, that they would fit under this. This law that is given. Okay, so this is involuntary slavery. If you take people and you force them into slavery, God is against that. Back at, here, these are completely voluntary contracts. No one's pointing a gun at someone's head and saying, yes, you have to work for this guy for 7 years. This is the the person who's going to be the bondservant initiates the relationship. They approach whichever person they want to work for. They approach them, hey, you got some extra room. Can I work for you for 7 years? And it's a voluntary thing between them there. Whereas this, slavery as we know it is not allowed. And so, everything about the American system of slavery was absolutely terrible. And unfortunately, the most horrible of it was the crossing of the Atlantic. That picture up there, it's a little hard to see, but that is a diagram of the ships, how much they would try to pack people to absolutely inhuman levels there into these ships and then send them across. And just absolutely atrocious, beyond our imagining today. Just the heat, the lack of water, the not being able to move anything, just completely terrible. And everything about slavery was bad, but if you could survive getting across on the boat and you got off, the worst was behind you in that sense. 25% of those that were captured in Africa, put on the boats, did not survive the 2-week journey across the Atlantic. And just completely tragic. But we know, if you know John Newton, who writes our beloved song Amazing Grace, he was a ship captain. He was a slave ship captain on one of these ships there. That's what he did. He writes Amazing Grace, what a wretch like me. That's what he's talking about, because he did that. He was in that industry. That was his business before the Lord saved him. And there's the cool Christian movie called Amazing Grace. You can watch it about a little bit about John Newton. It's mostly about William Wilberforce, his efforts in England to legally end slavery over there, and a lot of obstacles that he faced, but was able to bring it past. And so, yes, that's a good thing. Now, I'm going to get into some, I know we're live streaming here, I'm going to get into some dangerous waters, but we've got a little beef to pick with some of this critical race theory and this political correctness that is out there. This political correctness idea thrives on the idea of white guilt, that white people are just completely, not allowed in any kind of political discussion because of the sins of the past, is what that thing is. That all white people are racist, no matter where you live, no matter your background, no matter, all white people benefit from slavery somehow, no matter what your ancestors were, that all white people are guilty of slavery. And that's the modern critical race theory there, and it is very inconsistent in what it does. So, slavery has existed throughout human history, and with that, you get all kinds of deals. So you get, like in the Middle Ages, you got these guys called the Vikings, white guys up in Scandinavia, and they come down and they conquer a big chunk of Europe. The Normans take over early France and the northern coast there, and so they enslave other white European people, the Vikings there, that they do that. You've got after Muhammad founds Islam, a couple centuries after him, Islam expands in many directions. The Arabia, India, expands across Africa. And you've got, there on northern Africa, you've got black people who convert to Islam, and they come over and they invade Europe during the early part of the Middle Ages, during the 8th century. They're called the Moors. They get to Spain and Portugal. They enslave white Europeans there, have them as slaves for 400 years, okay? According to the Bible, all of that is wrong. All of that is wrong. But what does political correctness say today? Everybody else gets a pass. Okay, the Muslims, you don't hear anyone today about, harping, those Muslims need to pay back for the slavery they did 1,000 years ago. Okay? You don't hear any of that, but you hear it today. We got to make reparations for this. We got to right the wrong. And I'm not saying, our country still has room to grow in race relations and fairness. Okay, I'm not saying it's all hunky dory, and there's incorrect, and honestly, most of it is from our government and what they do to keep people oppressed is what they do. But with that, there's a complete inconsistency in this modern political correctness that's being pushed down on kids. If we look at what the Bible says any kind of forced enslavement was wrong. So yes, what was done in America, that was wrong. What was done by the Vikings, that was wrong. What was done by the Muslims, that was wrong. And the thing is, they still do it over in a lot of those parts of the world. We'll look at that in a second. What is unique about America and white Christianity in America is that America got rid of slavery. Okay, America, from after British independence, we only had slavery for less than 80 years. From 1780s, by the time America was founded with the Constitution, to 1863, that's all. We only had it. Less than 80 years was that. And so, I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not ashamed that we got rid of it, that we are unique among the world in history to say that we got rid of it at the terrible cost of 600,000 American dead. And it didn't happen here in Arizona, but you can go to Virginia and you can look at Antietam in Maryland. You can look at Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. Look at those cemeteries, those massive cemeteries, and the death that went on with that. Terrible cost that our nation paid for that sin. And we're still paying for the sins and the tension between the peoples that happened there. We're still paying for it, but we need to be consistent. The Bible is consistent. No group gets a pass just because they're Muslim or just because of this or whatever. All of this kind of forced kidnapping and enslavement is wrong, no matter what it is. The New Testament reaffirms this. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 9. Knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous person, but for the lawless and insubordinate, for the ungodly, for sinners, for the unholy, profane, for murderers of fathers, murderers of mothers, manslayers, fornicators, sodomites, for kidnappers. So there's our same, slave traders is what this is. They're there in the New Testament. That is repeated. And the unfortunate and tragic thing is that slavery is even more prevalent now than it has ever been in history, and it is going to be thriving to the very end when Jesus returns. You look at the back of the Bible in Revelation. When Revelation 18, when commercial Babylon falls, Revelation 18, verse 11, and the merchants of the earth will reap and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore, merchandise of gold, silver, precious stones. Lists a whole bunch of things. Verse 13, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, and chariots, and the bodies and souls of men. So when Jesus comes back to earth, whenever that all plays out and however it all happens, that slave trading will be thriving on the planet. And the unfortunate thing is that we, because of American history, we think of slavery as something from previous generations, great-great-grandparents back then in the 1800s. There we think of it as something, and Wilberforce and Lincoln and all of them, that they did away with that. So we think that battle has been won, when the reality is there are more slaves on planet Earth today than there have ever been. There have ever been in human history. Depending on your definition, there are at least 27 to 100 million slaves on planet Earth today. Maybe not necessarily in the United States like we think of it, but you go around the world that people are enslaved. And we use different terms. We don't call it slaves anymore. We call it fancy words like human trafficking. But that's what it is. It's the same thing there that you got. And again, like with the border and with this violence on the border, you got the cartels that they are willing to, the drugs are worth so much money that they will force people to do stuff like swallow a pack of heroin, sneak across the border, and then spit it up on the American side just to try to get things over here, forced into these terrible deals. And then, you go to these parts of the world, the Middle East and some of that, it's essentially slavery, what goes on in there. Northern Africa, terrible things. And there's what's also called exploitation of whether kids that are kidnapped and forced into prostitution, and just horrible, absolutely horrible stuff that goes on there, and it's very much alive. And some of it in our own country there, and then you take the world as a whole. Slavery is doing quite well, and is very much. And what the cry and shame, these people that are expending all this energy, so mad about what was legalized slavery in our country 150, 170 years ago, and not doing a thing to stop the slavery that's going on right now. They just want to be mad about the past, and they want to further white guilt and stuff. Whereas, I'm anti-slavery. Let's do something about slavery now. Let's do something about slavery on the current planet. And don't even get me started on idiotic American foreign policy. But you got countries, Libya over in Africa, on the northern coast of Africa. Muammar Gaddafi, he was a bad dude, He was a Colonel Gaddafi, terrorist, bad dude all around, but he had a functioning government of his country. And he has the Arab Spring, he has uprisings, so we go blow him to smithereens, and then we pull out after Benghazi, and so now there is no functioning government, and there's warlords that have taken over, and so you can go to Benghazi, and you can go to Tripoli, and you can go to those cities today, and there are open slave markets today. People in cages, and you can just go up and buy them if you walk on there, because we blew it all to pieces. And Syria, all these places that we just blow to kingdom come, that's what happens. That's what happens when ISIS takes over. That's what happens, these deals. Like, what on earth are we doing? What are we doing? We're furthering these bad, we're furthering, human rights is not winning, and we're not on the right side of what we're doing in other countries. It's just criminal there. And the same thing with, you got the Communist Chinese Party there. They are essentially locking their people up in living prisons. The Uyghurs and other ethnic groups that they don't like, they will lock them up in there. And we have all these American companies, Google and Apple and all them, that, we want to be about equality and we want to fight for oppressed groups and this, but yet they will sell their souls and all their values to go over there and bow to whatever the Chinese Communist Party wants to say in order to get their product there, in order to open their stores and sell their things, because they want the billion people in China to buy their stuff. And they will put all their values on the shelf and toss that out the window to go over there. And we're giving more money to oppressive regimes is what we're doing. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. All right, next one. Well, this will be our last one for today. Compensation for injuries. So the Bible gives this, though, so people are protected from being hurt in any kind of deal, because we are sinful people, boss and employee relationships. There's going to be some snags. There's going to be some issues that go along there. So Drew and Ashley were here this morning. I got a joke with Drew. Nobody who works at Walmart ever steals anything from there, do they? Okay, it just happens. The majority of theft that takes place with stores happens with their own employees, sadly. And you got people showing up late. There's always going to be things in our simple world of bosses and employees not getting along. And so God knows that. God puts some protections in here. So you got a guy who's maybe a little short-tempered, prone to fly off the handle. If he hurts his employees permanently, God says their labor contract, their 7-year contract, is null and void, that you get to go free and clear if you are injured in a permanent way. Exodus chapter 20. All these are Exodus 21 here. 21, verse 26. If a man strike the eye of his male or female servant, destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. If he knocks out the tooth of a male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of the tooth. So here you got the 7-year contract. So you might be just 1 year into this. You might have 6 years to go. If your boss flies off the handle, hits you, and you lose a tooth, you're free. You go, okay? You get 6 free years, so not necessarily a bad deal to trade for a tooth there. But yeah, of course, the picture up there, this is a picture from the American South, what was done. The masters there with the plantation owners would just beat their slaves almost to death sometimes, and usually they would try not to kill them because they were their money, they were their capital investment. But if they did, there wasn't really repercussions for it. That was the horrible thing. Whereas that is not what the Bible says. So here with the Bible, if you were injured in a permanent way, you could go free. Now, with that, okay, so keep in mind, this is all Exodus chapter 26. We're down in verse 26 here. Let's back up just a few verses up to verse 20 and verse 21. This is, in my experience, probably the most and I don't get into any of this, but when people get into these internet arguments about religion and stuff, and then YouTube comment wars and deals on there, this is the most copy and pasted verses that go in that, because it's very easy to take these out of context, and especially I really don't like how a lot of translations portray these verses. And so atheists will... here's how it usually goes, that if an atheist wants to shut down the argument, they will say, oh, you dumb Christians, and this happens like, any kind of Fox News website comments or any kind of story like that. You dumb Christians, you say you believe the Bible completely. Well, what about this? And then paste these two verses, Exodus chapter 21, verse 20 and verse 21. Put those verses in there. What about this? And it's used to say the Bible's completely illegitimate and you're just dumb for following a bunch of fairy tales. So what do these verses say? Well, let's read them. Verse 20, and if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod and he die under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Okay, so it's saying you can't murder your slaves. If you have a disagreement with them, you punish them and you kill them, you're a murderer. Okay, you'll not go unpunished. However, verse 21, notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. Okay. So, and that's the original King James of that. Unfortunately, other translations will make this even worse. They will make 21 say, notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. Okay? So if you read that on the surface, like, what? So is that, and so the atheist argument for this is saying, if you beat your slave to death on that day, you're charged with murder. But if you beat your slave to within an inch of his life, and then he hangs on 2 days and he dies on day 3, then you're scot-free, and then you can go out. Is that what the verses are saying? That's how the atheist argument goes with this, and unfortunately, the way a lot of translations are worded lends credit to that approach there. And so, but again, the Bible is completely consistent. So would it make any sense for that to be what it's saying? You can beat your slave to where he's gonna, as long as he dies on day 3, you're free. Whereas when 6 verses later, it says if you lose an eye, you go free, or you lose a tooth, you go free. Okay, that makes no sense. So it really comes down to, what does the Hebrew word continue mean? What does the Hebrew word continue mean? And the Hebrew word for continue literally means to stand or to rise up. So in modern English, we would say, notwithstanding, if he is back on his feet in a day or 2, then he shall not be punished. So saying, okay, you got a disagreement, the bondservant gets punished if he's not permanently injured. He doesn't lose a finger, doesn't lose an eye, not permanently injured in any kind of way. He may be a little sore. If he's back on his feet in a day or 2, no abuse worthy of going to the court has happened. But if he's not, he doesn't even have to die, but if he's laid up for a couple days, then you're going to a court, you've gone too far, is what it's saying there. So this is actually a protection for them. This is not saying you can beat your slave, and as long as you beat him in a way where he dies 3 days later, then you're okay. That's not at all what this is saying, but that is very common how this goes, and how a lot of people are kind of confused by this. And so, yeah, again, this is all protection. So, and yes, the example it uses, okay, if you lose an eye, if you lose a tooth, but that can be expanded to other things. If you lose a finger, if you lose a hand, if you lose a leg, whatever happens. We call this workers' compensation, is what we call it in our society. That if you get hurt on the job, your employer is supposed to help out with that. So if you lose your ability to work, that you're supposed to be compensated for those injuries. So last thing we'll look at, though, this goes with the idea. All right, so is the Bible okay with giving physical punishments to people when they get out of line? Our modern society is not. We're not okay with anybody getting hurt, or our modern everybody gets a trophy type society. Nobody can even get their feelings hurt, much less get physically hurt. But is the Bible okay with people getting physically punished when they do wrong? Yes. Yes, it is. So we see that there. And that has been the norm throughout the majority of human history. It's up until our modern time that we've got a better way of doing things. Whereas, yes, in most of human history, that has been just fine. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 2 and 3. Then it shall be, if the wicked man, so this is the courts in Israel, and this is for anybody. So this can be bondservants, this can be rich masters. You got 2 rich guys having a libel, slander battle between each other. If one is found guilty, the rich guy can be punished publicly like this, what they're saying. So this can apply to anyone. This is what the court is allowed to do. If the wicked man deserves to be beaten, the judge will cause him to lie down, be beaten in his presence according to his guilt with a certain number of blows. 40 stripes he may give him, and no more, lest he should exceed this and beat him with many blows above these, and your brother be humiliated in your sight. So you could be lashed up to a maximum of 40 times. So it's not so much to kill a person, not so much to abuse, but 40 was the maximum to teach a lesson. Now, the way they would do this in Israel is they had a whip that had 3 strands of rope on it with knots in it, and they would do 13 blows. So 3 times 13 is going to put you at 39. It's going to be 1 short of 40, and so they would do that. They would do 1 short just in case they miscounted, and they didn't want to go over 40 in each stretch there. So that was the Jewish mode. That is not the same as later, like the Roman or even later on in history, you got this thing like the cat of 9 tails that has 9 strands, and it's got bone and glass and things there. That's not what they used in Israel. So this was just used, it was just a rope with knots, and it was one means of punishment. So you didn't always have to use this. The court would decide what is best. How is this person going to learn best? Some people learn best through jail time. Some people learn best through financial punishments. You got to pay a fine. Some people learn best through pain. Okay, just kind of based on the person there. And so with this, the Apostle Paul, for instance, he was not guilty of a crime necessarily, but the courts didn't like him preaching about Jesus. So the Apostle Paul had this done to him 5 separate times, is what happened there. But the Bible does say some people learn better through physical pain. The Bible's clear on that. Proverbs chapter 17, Verse 10, rebuke is more effective for a wise man than 100 stripes on a fool. A whip, or Proverbs 26, verse 3, a whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the fool's back. So, yeah, some people, you hit them in the pocketbook, and they got to pay a fine. Yeah, they're going to learn through that way. Some people put them in jail. They lose some free time. They're going to learn that way. Some people, they're not going to learn. You can put them in jail, and they're never going to learn that way. Some people, you can fine them. They're never going to learn that way. Some people just kind of need a kick in the pants, is what the Bible is saying here. And so, yes, this was allowed, and this was allowed through most of history. And so if you go over to Virginia or to Maryland and Massachusetts and you visit where the reenactors are at Jamestown, Williamsburg, Plymouth, you visit all those, they're going to have stocks, and they're going to have reenactors in stocks there of people who've been found guilty of things, and people are going to throw fruit at them and call names and stuff. Okay, that was a form of punishment that happened there. And so, and even, whipping, like in the Navy, in the British Navy and in the American Navy, okay? If you make a mistake at sea, if you're a sailor and you don't follow the orders of your officer, you don't tie this knot a correct way, people can die. People can lose their lives. So very strict discipline in the Navy, and if you mouth off to your officer, you can be lined up there on the mast and you can be whipped a few times to learn your lesson. That was completely legal up until just over 100 years ago. So this was commonplace. Just our modern world has decided no one can ever get hurt whatsoever. Even their feelings can't get hurt. And so, but again, that's not what the Bible says with this. And again, wisdom, the courts had to use some wisdom. What is the best thing to teach this lesson to this person? Read a story about a guy, a young man, a teenager who completely absentee parents. So he wasn't an orphan legally, but in all effect he was. His parents were just completely out of his life. And he was in England, and he got into mischief, as wayward teens do. And so he got brought into court and was given like a pretty simple fine of like 80 euros. But he's got no parents in his life, no vehicle, no job, no way to get any kind of money to pay this fine. And so this thing racks up as he's in high school and as he finishes. And so this fine just keeps growing and growing until it's like a couple $1,000s in everything he tries to do in life. When he goes to apply for a job, he's got this court record hanging over him. When he goes to try to get a driver's license, this thing's hanging over him. And so he can't escape from this deal whatsoever. Probably would have been better if we could say, hey, you're going to spend the night in stocks, you're going to be a little sore, you're going to be a little embarrassed, but then you're done. You learn your lesson, you've been misbehaving, you learn this, get a little bit of pain, teach you this lesson, and then you're done with it. There. And there's multiple, why didn't they do community service or something? I don't know. But there. So again, with the Bible and with bond service, okay, yes, people that were guilty of crimes before the court could, in limited things, be punished in this way, but it was done. We're not cutting off people's hands for stealing things. We might give them a few lashings to teach them a lesson there, but not too many to permanently injure them, not to kill them. And probably, if you see it happen to your buddy, you're probably going to learn. Probably going to learn real quick, is what's going to take place with that there. So we'll stop with this. Next week we'll pick up on some things. There was no, you were not allowed to return runaway slaves, some other protections that we'll look at there in the Bible, so that we'll wrap up with that. So any questions? Kind of deep stuff, meaty stuff, but anything there? All right, so we'll end there. We did get enough traction on Sunday we are going to do the trunk or treat on the 31st. So anyone who wants to be involved in that we'll have vehicles out. Yes, Robert? Yeah.
We're going to put our tailgate down, right?
If you want to do that, or some people decorate the front.
I backed up my truck and it's stuck.
Okay.
So I can probably do it on the driver's side of my truck.
Yeah, some people decorate the hood, some people decorate the back. There are different options.
Instead of an incredible two-head transplant, I was thinking about doing a Scooby-Doo theme.
Yeah, mystery machine, whatever you want to do. There.
I go to like the, what's it, Hobby Lobby?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can help out if you need some guidance there. Or if people are decorating, if they want to use the big printer can print 11 by 17. If you want to print stuff to put on your car or put on boxes, that's fine. So yeah, we'll have more details on Sunday about getting ready for that. But we are, the bounce places I called when I thought we were going to do a festival, they were booked up. But then one of them called me and said that you got an opening, so we will have a bounce house for that for our church kids that are here. And if people are coming by, if they want to use the bounce house, that's fine. we'll be doing like the Wednesday before. We'll be getting baggies ready with the Halloween gospel tracts. I've got, y'all can take all those that you want to on there. I've got more saved up for the trunk or treat. We'll have those ready, and the church info cards that'll go in with that. And then if people, if they just want to be here on the 31st, okay, you don't want to decorate your car, but you just want to be here, okay, we need people to help man the bounce house, we need people to direct traffic, those are fine. Or you just want to hang out, that's fine. If you want to be at home and give candy to trick-or-treaters that come to your home, okay, do that. Take some of the gospel tracts that we have there and put them in the baggies and have a witness that way with the kids. Is that a possibility? So we'll have more details on the trunk-or-treat coming up. And but yeah, people want to start bringing candy or Ziploc bags, or a lot of decorations. We're going to need more cardboard. So if you're getting some packages coming in the mail, save that cardboard, bring it to the church. We'll turn it into decor for trunk or treat. So, all right, let's stand and close in prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your word and what it teaches. And we thank you even on issues that can seem difficult for us, that if we will accurately look into your word, we will see your mercy and your grace. We will see your protection for the vulnerable, Lord, for the widows, for the fatherless, and for the poor, and the grace that you gave for those types of people, that, Lord, you died for everyone. And we thank you for what your word teaches. Help us to know how to defend our faith in the age of skeptics and those that want to question and bring doubt on every corner. We ask that you give guidance for our church with the outreach we have coming up at the end of this month. That would be a blessing. We'd be able to have contacts with people in our community, maybe with the sick of our church and touch each of their lives, maybe with Pastor Howard and Sister Patsy while they're away and give them safety on their return travels, be with our men's retreat next week. All these things we lift up and praise you. In Jesus'